My name is Franklin, and I'm an atheist.
How would you know at all if you're being accurate?
I've read a lot about religion.
What exactly does through Jesus Christ mean?
What is it about their religion that resonates with who they are? It's not an anthropomorphic being. Is there an enemy? How does their religion make them a better person?
Can you explain to me and anybody who doesn't know what a mitzvah is?
What do they think is missing about how we understand the world?
What would be the difference between praying on a subject and just thinking on a subject?
Why don't people have superpowers anymore?
I think it's important to talk to them and find out what they believe.
Hello everyone. Today I'm speaking with Father Jensen of Calvary Episcopal Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Father Jensen is neighbors with the Tree of Life congregation, and fair warning, we do discuss the mass shooting that occurred there in 2018. Thanks again for those of you who are helping out on Patreon. The links are here and down below in the thingy. I hope you enjoy the interview. Make sure you stick around for two things. And yeah, I do wear an awful lot of red shirts. Thank you for noticing.
Hello and welcome to the What They Believe series. As you'll see, I'm not wearing a red shirt today. I did not want to get killed on the away mission. Instead, I'm wearing a gray shirt because I am gray. I stand between the candle and the star. Let's see if anybody gets that reference. Today, I'm speaking with Father Jensen of the Calvary Episcopal Church of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Father Jensen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Were you raised in the Episcopal Church or did you convert?
I was not brought up in any faith tradition. Where I was brought up was primarily Kentucky, Tennessee, Michigan, Virginia, North Carolina, a number of other places. And I can say that we might go once or twice to some church or various, spend the night with friends and would try a Methodist church, Catholic church, whatever the case may be. But I didn't have much religious upbringing at all. But in college, I went to liberal arts school in Kentucky and went there and was a philosophy major. You know, oh, my parents like, why do we just spend all this money and you're smart, why are you going to do this stuff? And loved it. And then I started studying religion. I studied history. And midway through my sophomore year of college, after taking quite a few religion and philosophy classes, I thought, this is great, but it doesn't make sense to me what I'm doing. It felt like the example I used, if I were studying French, I don't want to be speaking French and I'm immersed in that culture. I'm just studying religion, but not practicing it, which is the whole point. Even before that, I started exploring, I practiced and studied a lot on Zen Buddhism and spent time learning about various other faiths, including Islam, Judaism, and then some lesser known ones, and then lots of different types of expressions, at least of American Christianity. And to make this long story short, I went to my professor, the main religion professor, and said, I believe in God, but I'm not much more past that. That would be a Judeo-Christian God in some sense. Somewhere between that and the force, but not really articulated. And he said, okay, fine, what else? And I said, I've moved around a lot as a kid and I'd like to be a part of a tradition much broader than myself. He said, oh, you should go to the Episcopal Church. And I'd heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. I said, isn't that the one about Henry VIII or something? And went to a congregation called Christ Church Cathedral, which was a short walk from my college, and was blown away the first Sunday by the type of worship and the sincerity, how they held it. It was clearly a cherished thing. And then I went the next day and talked to a priest for a couple hours about all sorts of things. And he got me involved. And after about a year or two, this nice older lady there said, do you need a job? And I said, sure. So she had me pick up liquor bottles. This was a downtown church, and pick up liquor bottles in the garden. And then I started working as a security guard for the boys choir, girls choir at night. And then Sunday morning, I was opening the church and making coffee for 300 people. And I remember scrubbing scrambled eggs off of skillets when they made breakfast. And I learned how to run the sound system and all of that. And all along, I was reading and studying and worshiping. And after a couple more years of that, midway or into sophomore year of college, they said, they being the bishop and the priest there, have you ever thought about being a priest? Like, well, that's something old people do. Old to me was the age I am now, 50. Old people do that. And they said, well, you should consider it. And over a process of a couple more years, I did, and then they sent me to seminary in Northern Virginia.
Given that the Episcopal Church started after separating from the Church of England, I found it curious that the Episcopal Church has described itself as Protestant yet Catholic. Can you explain what that means?
In the earliest days, there was the church, at least in most of Europe that we talk about. And through the Protestant Reformation, there was a series, particularly in England, of it was very Protestant, and then it would lurch back to very Catholic. And this was a day, the political climate then in England is not terribly different than it is America today. It's not just, I disagree with you, but respect your opinion. You're wrong. And you could ascribe all sorts of names or values to people with whom you disagree then and now. And people would kill each other and they would fight. And so finally, in the when Elizabeth was the queen, it was called the Elizabethan settlement. We're done arguing all this, and all the problems were not solved, but at least that was a good start of, we're going to be both Protestant and Catholic, and be broad enough to hold those two poles in a sense together. And so things like our Book of Common Prayer from England then held beliefs that were okay enough, like I can compromise and live with it as a Catholic side or more Protestant side, and it developed there. When it came to America, there were similar things happening, and so we've been broad enough to include both of those. These days, it would be more progressive or traditional views of things, but since that time, we've largely thought of ourselves as a bridge church, trying to hold those two poles together, or a via media, which means the middle road or the middle way.
There are concepts that I assume that all Christians believed, but in research for this series, I came to realize that not all the Christian sects were congruent. What is your belief on the rapture?
There are a lot of things that Christians broadly don't agree on, like you could say even within Judaism or Islam. There are very different schools, that of Shia and Sunni, for example, in Islam. The rapture is a very American idea or expression of Christianity. It really comes from about 190, 200 years ago out of Great Britain, and then came here. Most people will be familiar with that concept from probably the Left Behind book series or something like that. The word rapture is not used in the Bible, but there is a very clear understanding throughout the scriptures that Jesus, who we believe is God incarnate, has come once, and that we would say is Christmas, and then his life, and then death, and then that will make a return, often called the second coming. There is those ideas of the rapture and that second coming and the return of Jesus are connected. What that second coming looks like, I have no idea, and I don't know what anyone who could honestly say they know. But I would say, why is it important? Why does it matter, the notion that God will return? And it seems to me the point of that is to complete the restoration of creation that begun with Jesus before, of reconciling all people to God, reconciling people to one another. That's the conclusion to that process, to finish that restoration of God and humanity all one to another. So that's not a cop-out answer, but the rapture as it's presented in those books, to me, is not biblical, not very interesting. However, the notion that God continues to restore and redeem the creation is, and I think that's why that matters.
I've seen pictures from several anti-LGBT protests where some snarky counter-protester would have a sign that says, "God hates figs," and it'll quote Matthew 21. Can you tell me what lesson one should learn from the story of Jesus withering a fig tree?
I think so. I can say that I, 15 years ago, was a priest in Kansas, in Lawrence, Kansas, where the university is. And the particular group you're referring to was Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka. Their sign was horrible, "God hates fags," and it is graphic stick figure signs, like they're kids. I mean, it's just tacky and gross. But they were protesting outside our church. We were welcoming of LGBT community way back then. And I honestly was annoyed, because why did it take them 3 years to come protest us? They should have been there much sooner had we really been doing our job. But I was not familiar with the "God hates figs" comment. That particular passage fits where it is in the gospel. Story briefly. Jesus is walking, sees a fig tree. Oh, he thinks there's a fig on it, and there's not, so he curses it and it withers away. Well, that's just bizarre. To understand the context, what happens just before and just after is Jesus encounters religious authorities, and these are Jewish religious authorities. But remember, he is too. So this is an internal discussion or conflict. And he curses his fig tree, and the fig tree was used throughout Jewish history, several places, Micah, Hosea, Jeremiah, as a symbol representing how people lived out their faith. And the fig tree either produces no figs or good figs or bad figs. And that is the symbol or metaphor for, are you doing good things in your life or no things or bad things? And if it's not producing anything or bad ones, it's cursed. And so Jesus is using this as a historical symbol they would have readily understood, because that had been done many times, to say, you guys are not doing your job. You're supposed to be religious and you're acting like jerks, and you should be serving people. And this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to wither and die if you don't start acting like it. So that's the odd story of the fig tree and the cursing of it. And it's a metaphor too that we'll miss, but they understood that because in their culture that had been used multiple times. So he's drawing on a metaphor. It's an apple pie, hot dog, mom, baseball. Oh, that's part of our identity metaphor that he's pulled into that. That's so they readily would have understood it, and it made sense to them.
Your church is both neighbors and neighborly with the Tree of Life congregation. Can you explain your relationship with them?
The Tree of Life is a synagogue. It's a conservative Jewish congregation in Pittsburgh, and we are Calvary Episcopal Church is at 315 Shady Avenue, and Tree of Life is a little less than a mile up the hill, also on Shady Avenue. On October 27th, 2018, you may remember the news. A lot of things have happened since then, but that was a major event, even worldwide within Judaism, but just for every human being. A gunman went into their synagogue on the morning of, it was a Saturday morning, and opened fire, ended up killing 11 people, injuring several others. It was a traumatic event. I could say while that event was happening, we had our annual huge, it's in a church, typical life, it's a giant rummage sale, but you can't call it a rummage sale because it's much nicer than your typical rummage sale. Raises $25,000. We give it all away to women and children's programs in this part of the city. There were members of Tree of Life here at that time, Jews, Christians, all sorts of people from the city come and buy stuff, and as I said, we give away the money. We locked down the place. We had a security guard here, but it was viewed, the attack on the synagogue was viewed as an attack on the whole city. The local Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, which I'm very friendly with the imam there, they raised $30,000 or $40,000 as a community and gave it to the Tree of Life in solidarity. We and many other churches of various types raised money, sent it to them. We did a big card that most of our parishioners signed and delivered that to them. Up the road on Shady Avenue, there was it became a memorial outside with cards and flowers and stones and all sorts of things there. And after a few days collecting money and the card signatures, I wrote a letter to their rabbi and their another executive there, and said, please accept this. So sorry this has happened. Please know that you're in our prayers. And we are really good at using our building. The building is based on 13th century English Gothic. It's designed by Ralph Adams Cram, who designed a lot of Princeton and many famous churches. It looks like an English cathedral that seats 1,000 people and plus a lot of space. It's stunningly beautiful. And we know how to share it. About 40 outside groups use it regularly, non-COVID time, for free. And that's the way we can serve the community. So if you need space for worship or meetings or offices, it's yours for free. I never thought, so I wrote the letter, sent it to them. That was early November or so. I never expected to hear from them. I thought they'd get lots of better offers. And then several months go by, and then we got a call. Are you serious? Do you mean this? And I wrote, it was an email actually, said, yes, we are. We'd like a group to come look at it. So they came over. looked at the spaces. There are a lot of crosses, there are a lot of Jesuses around here. I said, I know it's a church. Literally, the building is in the shape of a cross. That's how it's designed. And we'd like to have, could we have our high holiday services, so roughly a year from the attack, can we do them in your church? And I said, of course you can. And I didn't ask my board or anybody else, because I already knew the answer. Of course we can. And that was, by the way, the consensus. Everybody said, I'm so proud, I'm so pleased we can do this. There was lack of trust. And remember, they just got attacked. So a lot of different people said, why did you do this? My answer is, that's the right thing to do. As a person of faith, as a human being, it's the right thing to do. And furthermore, there are neighbors literally a mile away, and in a broader sense of people in communion also created in the image of God. That's what you're supposed to do. I hope somebody would do that for us. God forbid the same thing happen. And so they came and they got more comfortable. And I got to know the rabbi pretty well. And a lot of their people came, and several of them have joked, like, I think I could give tours of the building. I know it so well. And I can't remember exactly the numbers that were here the first year, but for all the high holidays, but there were times the building was almost full. So probably 800 or so at one time. There was media coverage and those other things, but a small thing to me that got a lot of note was we put a veil over the big crucifix, which is right. If you imagine where they put their Torah in the Holy of Holies, there's a huge crucifix over top of that. I just covered that with a black veil. Again, stained glass windows of Jesus and crosses all over the place, but right where they are, where their focus is, I thought, that's, are you denying who you are as a Christian? Of course not. But if you invite a guest over for dinner, you find out, what do they like to eat or not like to eat, or what are they allergic to, or what do they like to drink, or whatever. And it was hospitality as far as we were concerned. And the people that came couldn't have been more warm or gracious and appreciative. And we just liked each other. And something that I have never experienced before, and I've written and talked about it, that normally when you get to meet somebody, you talk about who you are and who your family is and what you do, and you kind of integrate your lives over time. And then you become friends as you learn to trust each other. It's our two communities, and the rabbi and I skipped all those steps and became very deep friends, I think because of the mutual trust that happened in coming together that way. I was there at all the services, just in the background if they needed something. They did it all, they ran it all. We wanted to be together. And so we did a Christmas party, and we each year, right before Christmas, we have a big pageant. So kids act out, little kids are dressed as shepherds and angels and cows and things. And we rent a whole bunch of baby sheep and goats and a full-size camel to process down the aisle and sing. It's really quite magnificent. And they came, many from their congregation. And then afterwards, we had a Hanukkah party. And they had songs, and we did food and all. And it was really wonderful. And then there's something called Purim, which is today, actually. And the rabbi writes a Purim spiel, a play each year to retell the story. And I went and took part in the play. And we did it at our church and then at their synagogue. And we've done multiple things like that. And we just agreed recently, they're coming back this year. I would have never predicted this, and I didn't mean it to be so long-winded, but I'm excited about it because it's two very different groups of people who become deep friends, who have a love and respect and care for each other. And you wouldn't necessarily think that. I can say on a personal note, I just turned 50 years old, and 6 weeks ago, completely out of the blue, I had a heart attack. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I exercised, eat healthy. I just had a heart attack and almost died. I was 5 to 10 minutes from death, according to the doctors. And I got tons of cards and notes from my parishioners. But the first call I received was from the rabbi. And I just got another letter yesterday from a member of the Tree of Life. I heard about your heart attack. I'm so sorry. Here is a gift to your church for what you've done for us. And in Judaism, the number 18 represents life. And so it's a check for $54, 3 times life, Trinity of life. And here you go, thank you. And that just doesn't happen. And so that's, to me, is a symbol of the relationship we built, which again is the point of what's being made in the image of God. That relationship to me is the best metaphor I can think of to describe what being an image of God looks like. It's relationship with people learning and loving and being together in a way that no one expected.
Human beings are part of God's creation and made in the image of God. So is God anthropomorphic? Does he, have feet and a face?
Not to my knowledge, at least not as we as a tradition have understood that. And the basic idea from that comes from the very beginning of the Bible in the first book of Genesis, which itself means the beginnings. And when God created heavens and the earth, and God created, as it says, Adam is how we normally pronounce that. Adam or Adam means people, humans. In this case, it means male and female when you refer to Adam. And God created Adam in their image, God's image. The basic idea of that is not that we necessarily have, God has hands and feet. It's almost the reverse, or we mirror God, not physically so much sense of relationship, that God has an internal relationship, and the really confusing technical idea for that in Christianity is called the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So God is by nature relational, even within God's self. And we as human beings, reflecting this image of God, are relational creatures. As has been said many times, no man is an island, no one is an island, but we are most fully human in relationship to other people, with other people. That's how we know who we are and who they are. I think further, and there are lots of strands, there's never been one clear, definitive, and agreed upon answer about what does this mean. We all like the idea, but no one exactly agrees on what that means to be in the image of God. It further suggests things like creativity in addition to being in a relationship. It suggests the idea of free will, at least as humans, limited. In our classic tradition, we've said humanity was born with perfect free will without sin, and then Adam and Eve in the garden with the fruit, by the way, it doesn't actually say apple, but most people say it's an apple, partook of this fruit, and then they knew the difference between good and evil, and they were naked and they hid themselves from God, the first sense of shame among people. That's when that image of God was muddled or disfigured, or the classic term is sin came in. So we're not as God created us to be, which would be fully in the image. And that in the tradition, Jewish tradition, you get the law, the prophets, and the rest, and then Christianity, Jesus, to reconcile, to restore that full image of God. So the basic idea is it means we're made to be in relationship. We have free will, at least to a limited degree. We have a sense of reason, a sense of self-reflection or introspection, a sense of time even to see beyond and connections to things. So it's at least all those things to be made in the image of God suggest to us.
Do you have a favorite passage from Scripture?
I have a couple. One would be Micah 6:8, and that is, what does the Lord require of you, O mortal, but to love justice? You know this one?
Actually, my previous guest had the exact same answer. Please go on.
Well, I'll pick a different one then.
Okay.
Matthew 25, and it's a long passage about when the Son of Man, Jesus, comes in glory, he returns, and his angels about him, without reading the whole thing, because it's really, really long. It's a way of saying, how have you lived and how are you accountable for your life? And the story says, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or naked and clothe you, and so on? And it's the idea is what you've done to the least of these, someone who can't repay you, you have done to me. That is, how you treat other people who can do nothing in return is in fact how you're treating God, or Jesus in this case. And that's the passage I had read when I came to my current position in Pittsburgh 7 years ago. And what I try to make, though I'm far from perfect at it, the defining thing, what I'd like to look back on is this: what I tried to do. Was I perfect? No, but I did my best at living out the faith in this particular way.
I'd like to thank Father Jensen for joining me here today, and I shall do so now. Thank you, Father Jensen.
Thank you.
In 1985, the Texas Department of Transportation wanted something to help to curb the enormous amounts of litter that was being thrown out of vehicles. At the time, Texas was spending over $20 million a year cleaning up this carelessness. Mike Blair and Tim McClure of GSD&M came up with an effective slogan that soon appeared on advertisements and road signs all over the state. That slogan, "Don't mess with Texas." It's important to note that the Texas Department of Transportation owns the trademark on this phrase. Thus, all of these products are improperly using this trademark slogan, and the manufacturers of these products are indeed messing with Texas. Hans and Margaret Ray were married in 1935 and moved from Hamburg, Germany to Paris, France. They were both Jewish, so the reason for the move should be obvious. Hans was interested in astronomy and was an artist. A publisher in France saw his drawings of cute animals and commissioned the Rays to create a children's book. That book was Cicely G and the 9 Monkeys. Yeah, I've never heard of that book either. One of the characters in that book was popular and the Rays began to create stories about it. But World War II was headed towards Paris. So on a pair of homemade bicycles, they fled to Spain. They took a ship to Brazil and ultimately New York City. Among their possessions was their book, Curious George. The pedant in me has to point out that George is a chimpanzee, not a monkey.
Thanks for watching, and may the road rise with you.